Back in July 14th, 2019, I visited the Forney Transportation Museum in Denver, Colorado. A pair of BNSF SD40-2s, 1NH1, were on a local job near the museum. Outside the museum is Caboose 01447, which was built in the 1940s or 50s and came to the museum in about 2018. Near the entrance to the museum is this brass model of a Japanese National Railways Class D51. Over 1,000 were built and about 100 still survive in Japan. And there's this photo of a steam locomotive exiting the Muffet Tunnel. As you enter the main museum room, you are greeted by this Forney locomotive. This 3-foot gauge 044 was built by H.K. Porter in 1897. It was operated by the Cora, Texas plantation. A couple of railroads in Colorado used Forney-type locomotives. I really like the unique builder's plate on these Porter locomotives. These types of locomotives were also used by elevated railroads before electrification, the most famous being New York's 3rd Avenue. Behind the Forney is this unusual 4-wheeled passenger car. This car was built in Sweden in 1909. It ended up in America as a dressing room car for traveling shows. This car ended up at the Midwest Central Railroad until 1997 when it came to the museum. It is lettered for the fictional Forney and Central Platte Valley Railroad and isn't the same gauge as the Forney locomotive. This is the best picture I could get of the whole thing. Also with the Forney locomotive is this 1971 snowmobile. The museum is known for its large collection of automobiles, like this 1916 Detroit Electric. Electric cars could be started quickly without a hand crank and had an easy transmission. This one has a steering bar rather than a steering wheel. This 3-wheel 1936 Morgan Racer also caught my eye. And this 1955 bubble car, which doesn't take up too much space like other automobiles. This bell came from a Baltimore and Ohio locomotive. There is also this model of Big Boy 4005, one of only 3 made. And next to it is the real Big Boy 4005, built by Alco in 1941. Number 4005 was retired in 1957 and sat outside until about 2000. This photo shows 4005 preparing to be moved to its current location. 4005 was also the only big boy to burn oil until 4014 was converted to oil during 2019. This is the coal area in the tender. You can clearly see the stoker screw. The museum included a diagram of the full coal stoker. Even with the stoker screw, the firemen still had to shovel some coal manually. The knobs on the boiler backhead are labeled. Normally the cab interior is gated off, but they did unlock it for me so I could get a picture of the inside of the firebox and close-up views of the cab. They also have a list of all the other surviving big boys. I've seen 4006 in St. Louis, 4023 in Omaha, 4004 in Cheyenne, and of course 4014 in excursion service. But I saw 4005 before I saw 4014. 4005 is also the only big boy to suffer a major accident in 1953. Right next to the big boy is rotary snowplow 900,099. If you look closely at the blade center, you can see a little face painted on. I'm not sure if it was painted by UP crews or by the Forney Transportation Museum. Here's a look at the firebox of this snowplow. I believe it is oil-fired, but the museum states it was built as a coal-fired engine. You can clearly see the front of an oil tank on the tender. The whole tender probably came from a Union Pacific locomotive that was retired. This rotary snowplow was built in 1909 by Alco for the Colorado, Wyoming, and Eastern. This line became part of the Union Pacific in 1951. The snowplow was retired in 1969. Behind the snowplow is Chicago Northwestern 444, a 460. It is of the class R1 built in 1908 by Alco. When it was retired in 1958, it went to the Black Hills Central Railroad. In 1968, it came to the Forney Transportation Museum. The museum claims this locomotive ran in South Dakota during its working life. The back of the tender has its board replaced and its coupler missing. By missing I mean laying on the ground next to it. The museum also has Denver and Rio Grande Western 3006, a GP30 built in 1962. It sat in UP's Denver yard until 2017 when the museum acquired it. I really like its current appearance. It even has the remains of that barcode from the 1970s. Here's a picture of the locomotive being moved to the museum. Sister Unit 3011 is at the Colorado Railroad Museum. Here are some scans of the GP30 Owner's Manual. Behind the big boy is Denver and Rio Grande Western dining car number 804, Pikes Peak. This heavyweight diner was built in 1927 and the interior was currently undergoing restoration. Behind the GP30 is UP 903053, a steam crane nicknamed Aunt Peachy. This crane was built in 1901 in Bay City, Michigan. This crane worked in Union Pacific's 23rd Street Yard in Denver. Originally powered by coal-fired steam engine, it was later run on compressed air. It was used well into the 1960s. Behind the crane is some other MOW equipment, including a Fairmont Speeder from 1946. There are also a couple of other photos of inspection vehicles. As the sign says, the next car is a private business car. This is the Polk Brothers car number 1, painted in an Illinois 150 livery. Its interior was closed off, but I'll show you pictures of what I saw from the outside. This car was built in 1902 with a wood body, but was later rebuilt by the CB&Q in 1930 to its current steel body configuration. In 1967, the car was acquired by the Polk Brothers Furniture Store in Chicago and painted in this Illinois 150 livery. It was purchased for an intended use as a private car in 1972 by someone in Denver, but ended up in the Forney Museum in 1978. When I first saw this car, I thought it was used on like a circus train. On the observation deck, there are these two plaques noting the restoration of this car. This is the view from the inside of the corridor end of the car. The rest of the shots are moving from the front of the car to the observation end of the car. The information sheet was on one of the tables next to the windows. The car was basically unaltered when it came to Denver. There's even a false fireplace in the observation room. This is Denver and Salt Lake Wooden Coach 715. It was built in 1906 by Pullman. The car ended up as a restaurant in Laramie, Wyoming in the 1960s before being purchased by the museum in 1975. Behind the coach is wooden caboose number 10501, built for the Colorado and Southern probably around the 1910s. I believe you could have walked through it and the wooden passenger car, but they weren't open. These cases of railroad artifacts were seen next to the train cars.
Schedules. That future train looks more like a BART train than an Amtrak. Post-war 675 and ancient metal coaching.
I actually own a copy of the Santa Fe timetable in the middle. This is Henschel & Son 040 number 7. This locomotive was built in 1930 and worked in Denmark. The locomotive came to the United States in 1961 and was purchased into the museum's collection in 1968. Here's a close-up look at the buffer and coupling system. A similar locomotive works on the Boothbay Village Railway in Maine. Another Henschel & Son locomotive works on the Cripple Creek and Victor Railroad. Now this is something unusual, Great Western Railway coach sides. These are film props used in the filming of The Lion, Witch, and the Wardrobe from 2005-ish. These panels were donated to the Forney Transportation Museum after production had finished. There's also a car from the Denver Tramway's 15th Street line. Cable car number 40 dates from 1886. Although the cable cars were gone by the turn of the century, this one survived in private hands and ended up being restored by the museum. This is a painting of Denver and Intermountain car number 25, which survives at the Lakewood Federal Center, which can be ridden on certain days. This is the body of streetcar number 77. It was built by the Wilbur Car Company in 1906. The car was retired in 1946 and was purchased by a private individual who used it as a children's playhouse. I believe this is a Peter Witt streetcar in service in Denver. Now that I've shown you all the trains in the museum, I'll show you some of the other vehicles in the Forney Transportation Museum. Starting with this 1923 school bus, and this 1923 fire engine from upstate New York. You can sit inside this 1915 Model T touring car. During my visit, they had a temporary exhibit of 1980s cars. In my opinion, cars stopped looking cool in around the 1980s. This 1986 Oldsmobile silhouette is supposed to look like the concept variation. This 1989 Buick Riviera was partially restored. That's quite the interior in that Oldsmobile. Here's what the visual information system looks like outside of the car. I like how this thing is higher off the ground. It even still has a temporary tag on it. An unusual artifact at this museum is this cubed car. They also have a Dodge and bumper car from Rio Gardens. One of my favorite non-railway vehicles in this museum is this Case steam tractor. This single-cylinder engine was built in 1923. Hopefully I can see one of these in action someday. Behind the engine is a threshing machine which it worked with, and a small-scale version of it. This small helicopter was built in 1966 and is one of only 45 ever made. Brantley helicopters became a part of Learjet in 1966. I really like the look of this 1957 Dodge. I also like that some of the vehicles have vintage advertisements next to them. Another one is this 1964 Ford F-250. I like that this one Ford car is made of two different cars. This is a 1907 Orient buckboard, probably the cheapest car on the market back then. This is a brilliantly restored 1959 Volkswagen Beetle. This car is right-hand drive, and this sheet explains why left-hand drive became so popular. This is also a right-hand drive example. This car has unusual headlight shape. As well as being unusual for having 3 axles.
Magic 24 Buick Special Touring. Amelia Earhart's own car. Ooh, seat on the side. Is that fine? One-cylinder engine?
And this thing was air-cooled well before Volkswagen stuff was.
Air-cooled.
I really like this model of a car dealership. Hopefully I can model something like this myself someday. I really like this Colorado license plate collection. It kind of reminds me of the Kansas license plate collection my grandfather had in his garage.
So this thing came from England in 1960. Liverpool and Manchester coach. This is nice. Like a transition between automobile and horse carriage. Door in the back. That's actual woodworking, not separate piece. It's just carved wood. So this hearse was used to carry someone who died as a child. This here will in the front. It kind of looks weird at the front. Studebaker.
This museum also has a collection of bicycles, including this rickshaw.
I think most Denver B-cycle. There's someone using Kansas City too. My grandparents had one of these trikes at their house that they let me ride. Now I realize I'm kind of going backwards. It's a Chevron tanker. Same on this one. Nice old mail truck. Steering wheel is on the left. International Harvester car from 1909. It's a nice blue Chevy from 35. This is a Ford Here's a weird vehicle. A Samsung E15. This 1925 white bus. Some motorcycles here. It's a very comfortable sidecar. 27 Henderson. 1932 Tornax 1000. Two headlights. 1952 Mustang Pony. 1902 Winston Torpedo. 85 BSA Gold Star DB34. 1958 Ariel Red Hunter. 1959 Triumph Cub. Doesn't have a headlight. Motor scooter. 1959 Cushman Eagle. 65.
All of the bikes and motorcycles in this little area were all military bikes.
Bikes used by the armed forces. Will Eisenhower. I guess you have to hold the button.
There's also a giant hall of model vehicles which can be accessed from the main entry room.
It's not British.
This shelf with all the steam-powered vehicles is my favorite.